Three things that I don't like about owning my home. Number one is maintenance on stupid stuff.
I think I fully regret buying a house now. Like, it's not the worst choice I ever made, but it's so expensive.
I'm regretting buying a house. My fiance and I have not even lived in it for a year.
That's real, and those aren't isolated cases. I've seen versions of that conversation right here in Kelowna. Buying a home can be one of the best financial decisions you'll ever make, but it can also be one that keeps you up at night wondering how you actually got into that situation. And the reasons people end up in that spot are almost always the same thing: costs they didn't see coming, decisions made way too fast, and like we saw a lot of that happen 4 or 5 years ago. Or maybe it's the neighborhood looked great on paper and it felt wrong 6 months in. I've also seen that happen as well. And in Kelowna specifically, we've got a few versions of this that are unique to our market. So whether you're moving here from out of province, you're upsizing, downsizing locally, or you're looking at this at some sort of investment play, I want to walk you through what I actually see on the ground, because the stuff that leads to buyer's remorse, a lot of that is avoidable. So let's get started with point number one, and that is stretching yourself too thin on the total cost of home ownership. The number that buyers fixate on is usually the purchase price, that big number, and sometimes, or the next number would be the mortgage payment, what you're paying month to month, which makes sense. But the real cost of home ownership is what catches people off guard. So you have your property taxes that could be an extra $100 to $500 a month, depending on where you are and what you purchased. Utilities, that'd be the heating and cooling costs of maybe it's a larger home, and heating and cooling that through an Okanagan winter or summer. Another one is the strata fees. Strata fees, obviously you're going to be in a stratified property with a condo or townhome. Insurance certainly isn't going down these days. And another one would be the potential, the interest rate. So if you're taking a variable rate and rates happen to go up, like we saw a few years back, those extra costs can add up fast and really add up in ways that don't show up in what the bank necessarily approves you for. So an example of this would be someone gets pre-approved for, let's say, $700,000, and you immediately start looking at a $700,000 property without really digging into the monthly costs over and above what, say, your mortgage payment would be. And just remember that the pre-approval that the bank gives you is a ceiling, not a target to shoot for. Now, this is going to be dependent on your specific life and situation, but just because the bank says yes to something doesn't mean that it will fit your specific lifestyle. I've personally seen it where people who qualify no problem on paper, they move in and then they realize that their actual monthly outflow was it was $400 to $600 more than they actually planned for. So that gap doesn't necessarily, it depends on your situation, but that gap doesn't necessarily sound massive until it's maybe month 7 or 8 and you're having to cut back on everything. So just make sure you budget for the full picture, not just for what the bank might approve you for. And point number 2 is buying the wrong neighborhood for your actual life and your lifestyle. This one is huge in Kelowna specifically. Kelowna looks like one city on a map, but it's really a collection of some pretty different communities. And the one that looks great in photos or online or video might be completely wrong for how you actually live. It might look, you might be coming from the city and you want to live out in for some rural life that may not actually fit your life once you're living in it day to day. Another good example would be West Kelowna. It's a beautiful area over there, but if you're working in downtown Kelowna or you're working over at the airport, you're crossing that bridge every single day, and in the summer it can be a pain when the population essentially triples here. That commute could get old really, really fast, and you might find yourself end up selling your property within 6, 12, 18 months just because you couldn't do that commute anymore. And the same thing goes with, let's say, a rural acreage. Maybe you've lived the city life for a long time, and now you're okay. I want to be down in, or I want to be up in the hills. I want to be rural. I want to be away from people. But as it looks on, let's say it looks great on paper and in your mind, but then the reality hits of, living farther from, let's say, amenities. You have children, you're driving back and forth all the time, or you have septic issues that are a headache that you didn't have to deal with in the city. Winter road conditions, you're constantly having to think about that. That's adding more stress to your life, and the distance from everything really starts to wear on you. You can always renovate a kitchen or change the home, but you can't renovate your location. So location certainly matters more than the house itself. Make sure you do your homework on the location and the lifestyle before you make that huge decision. Now, point number 3 is going to be a very specific crowd, and these are pre-sale condos bought in 2021 and 2022, but I think this should serve as something to be aware of for the future as well, if you're watching this in a market where there's a lot of pre-sales. So just keep this in mind if you're thinking of a pre-sale and you happen to be watching this in, maybe it's 2030. So this is probably, thinking back to 2021 and 2022, this is probably the most financially painful version of buyer's remorse that I'm seeing in Kelowna right now. And this is happening across the country. And it's a very real situation. A lot of those buyers, some local, some from out of province, purchased these pre-sale condos during the peak hype years again, 2021, 2022. The pitch was very simple. Put down a deposit. The market keeps going up. You can close in 2, 3, 4 years and you've made money. Maybe you rent it out. Maybe you assign it. Projects in areas like Kelowna's downtown or parts of the Lower Mission are completing now or have completed very recently. And the values in many cases are well below what those buyers paid in pre-sale. So, and I'm really not talking about a little bit. I'm talking in some cases $200,000 or $300,000. And now they're closing on those condos that they essentially overpaid for, or now we're in a much different market now. And the rental market is a lot softer than where they paid in those higher peak years. Now we have a lot of purpose-built rentals here in Kelowna that are driving those rental prices down. So now they're competing with, if they did plan to rent it out long term, they're competing with all those corporate purpose-built rentals. It just goes on and on with those pre-sale condos purchased pre-sale in 2021 and 2022. Now let's just change gears a bit here. Moving on to point number 4, rushing the decision, especially in a competitive market. Kelowna still has pockets where good properties move fast, even though the market overall is slow. If you have a gem, it's going to be still moving fast. It doesn't matter what market you're in. The spring market, especially, maybe not this spring, but typically can get competitive in certain price ranges and neighborhoods. And that pressure can cause you to make some mistakes. So whether that's skipping the home inspection, maybe you're in multiple offers and you're like, oh, we want to get this property, but you might have to skip the home inspection. Wouldn't recommend that in any market if you can, but it's solely up to you whether you want that property or not. Sometimes you have to do that. Don't recommend it, but certain circumstances may lead you to that. Now, another one on top of skipping the home inspection is not properly reviewing strata documents. So make sure you get all of those from the seller and from your agent. You can get all those strata documents and review them before you remove subjects. Another would be making an offer sight unseen because you're buying, say, from out of province and you don't want to lose that property. Always try to see it in person if you can, or get someone in town to see it, your agent. I have helped buyers purchase property sight unseen from out of province, but I've walked through it, gathered all the information beforehand, so they're making that informed decision, in those hotter markets. But I've also heard of things going sideways, and that ends up costing people real money. And even when you do everything right, let's say you do have that home inspection and everything during that time checks out, things can still go wrong after you move in. A home inspection is just a snapshot of that specific day. It's not a guarantee that the house is going to be perfect from the moment that you get the keys. You must budget for those unexpected costs because ultimately they will show up. Home ownership overall is not cheap. And that leads us into point number 5, buying too much house for where you actually are in life. So now this is where, let's say buyers upsize from, let's say, a 1,000 square foot condo into a 3,000 square foot home with a big yard because, their lifestyle, or they got a bump in income. Now they can afford the single family home and they qualified for that mortgage. Everything looked incredible on paper and online. And then, a year or two rolls around and the lawn maintenance is eating every single weekend, or lawn and house maintenance is eating every single Saturday, Sunday. And the utilities are way higher than maybe they expected. And they're maintaining a house instead of actually living. And to avoid this, a good rule of thumb is to budget roughly 0.5% to 1%, depending on the property, to of the purchase price for ongoing maintenance costs. So, for instance, let's use that $700,000 example again. That's if it's 1% you're saving, save $7,000 a year for upkeep on the homes. Obviously, it's going to really depend on your home and what it needs and upcoming maintenance. Maybe you need a roof in the next few years. Try to plan for that before it's a $25,000 bill in 1 year. Because as homeowners, we know that unexpected things will happen. It's really just inevitable. So you really want to think about that and buy a home for your actual life, not one that will have you, that famous quote of keeping up with the Joneses. You don't want to have yourself stuck in a situation like that. So what's the takeaway here? Buyer's remorse in Kelowna is very real, and a lot of it is avoidable with the right information before you sign any sort of documents. You want to budget for the full cost, not just that one mortgage payment, because there's a lot that goes on over and above that mortgage payment. You want to know the neighborhood before you commit to it. I've had people recently actually, where they're moving here from out of province and they're renting for 6 months, maybe a year, just to get the feel for the different neighborhoods before they commit to an actual area and where they actually want to lay roots, which can be a smart move for some people. And if you're looking for maybe a few years down the road here, a pre-sale or a condo, do the actual math on what it costs to hold that month to month, and make sure, again, read those strata documents before you make any sort of decision or remove subjects, which ultimately you purchased a home at that point. And don't let a hot market rush you into something you haven't thought through thoroughly. And if you're trying to figure out whether buying in Kelowna even makes sense for your specific situation right now or in the future, I'd be happy to discuss your options, whether you are buying or selling in today's market. You can simply give me a call or text to the number on the screen. And I think this next video, if you are looking in the market right now, this next video breaks down everything that's happening in Kelowna right now when it comes to real estate prices and the market.